The burden is really on all of us to make sure that all citizens understand the First Amendment, why it's so important, and what it does.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning into this installment of the First Amendment Museum's one-on-one interview series. Today, I'm joined by Justin Silverman, Executive Director of the New England First Amendment Coalition. An attorney based in Westborough, Massachusetts, Justin's experience prior to NEFAC is a broad mix of journalism, law, and entrepreneurism. A graduate of Suffolk University Law School and Syracuse University, Justin has worked as a full-time law clerk and has contributed to and even founded multiple websites relating to the law. Today, he leads the New England First Amendment Coalition and all the good work it does, and is an adjunct faculty member at the University of Maine School of Law. Justin, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Max, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So why do you think the First Amendment is important? What is its purpose?
Oh, it is very important. I'd like to share this story that I read. I can't take credit for it. It's by a professor named Burt Newborn at, I believe he's at New York University. And he wrote this great book called Madison's Music. And the whole premise of this book is the First Amendment was written as a way to give us a blueprint for our democracy. So why is it important? Because ideally, all of the 5 freedoms, which I'll go into in a second, all of these 5 freedoms, they work together to create what ideally is the perfect democracy. So what do I mean by that? And again, quoting from the book here, using Newborn's material, we start with the very first freedom that's listed in the First Amendment, religion. So we can't really speak about things that are important to us until we first figure out what is important to us. What are our principles? What are our morals? What is important to us as individuals? And that's where the right to religion, the right to figure out what our own belief system is, that's very first on the list, first freedom. Once we figure that out, well, now we need the freedom to actually express ourselves and share those important things with others, speech. But just having this conversation between you and me, Max, this isn't enough, right? Like, we need the freedom to speak to the masses. And that's where the press comes in. So we have religion, we have speech, we have press, but still, in order to make our democracy work, in order to really emphasize why the First Amendment is so important, we need the right to then not only speak to the masses, but to associate with others, to assemble in the town common, protest in the streets around what is important and what our own beliefs are. And then finally, petition, the last freedom given to us in the First Amendment. We need the right to take all of that and then petition our government to make change. So if you take all of those freedoms all together, it really is, I think, a blueprint for what our democracy should look like, how it should work. And it's all encompassed. All 5 freedoms are encompassed in our First Amendment. And that is, I think, the strongest argument as to why our First Amendment is so important.
Awesome. Yeah, you summed it up perfectly. And that's a great book for anybody listening. I highly recommend Burt Newborn's Madison Music. It's one of the first books I ever read about the First Amendment myself. So what is the New England First Amendment Coalition and what does it do?
Yeah, so we do a lot. We actually have an interesting backstory. In 2006, we had a group of journalists in Providence, primarily at the Providence Journal, and those in Boston, primarily at the Boston Globe. They came together and said, we as journalists are having an incredibly difficult time getting access to government information. We're having a difficult time getting public records. We're having a difficult time getting into government meetings and figuring out what government is doing on our behalf. Why don't we create an organization that can advocate for better access to government information? And there was born New England First Amendment Coalition way back in 2006. And for the next several years, most of the work the coalition did was to pursue more government transparency. Over the last 10 years or so, our mission has really evolved to incorporate all freedoms of the First Amendment, but primarily matters related to the press. So any kind of restriction on the press or the ability of journalists to do their job, we're interested. We want to get in on that and make sure that journalists are not, their freedoms aren't infringed in any way, and they have all the tools they need to do great work. But as well, we're Also working with issues related to assembly, your right to protest, and of course, sticking to what our core mission was back in 2006, government transparency, and continuing to work in all 6 New England states, not just on all those First Amendment related issues, but open government issues as well, and making sure that all of us, journalists or otherwise, have access to our government and can get the information we need to make sure that government's working on our behalf and making right decisions in our name.
What are some of the important things we should be currently watching and paying attention to regarding the First Amendment here in New England?
Yeah, so there's a lot of really interesting and important issues, I think, when it comes to the First Amendment and the public's right to know about government. As far as I'll address government transparency first. We're heading out of this COVID pandemic, and over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of changes related to the open meeting law and whether or not we can access open meetings through Zoom, for example, access them remotely as opposed to having to get in our car and drive cross town or cross state even to get to a government meeting just to see what's going on. So one of the silver linings during the COVID pandemic was the ability of all of us to Zoom in to attend these meetings remotely. And there's a lot of discussion now within all states, but the 6 New England states, about what parts of that should remain post-COVID. Should we still have the right to attend these meetings remotely? Should government bodies be able to meet exclusively remotely, or should they still have to meet in person? Can we have like a hybrid system where we can have the best of both worlds and more access? So there's a lot of these really important conversations going on in each New England state about, well, what does the future look like as far as open meetings and our access to these meetings? On the First Amendment front, a couple of things come to mind. The right to protest. I think there are a lot of issues that we're going to be discussing now and moving forward. What are our rights as citizens to not only protest in the streets, but protest in front of, I don't know, a Supreme Court justice's home, right? Is that an invasion of their privacy? Is that an infringement on our rights if we can't stand in front of a home or walk down a residential street, speaking loudly, shouting what's on our mind? Where is that balance between an individual's privacy interests and our collective interests to be able to protest and to speak our mind and to demonstrate, particularly when it comes to political speech? And I think there's also going to be a lot of First Amendment fallout related to the Dobbs decision, what overturned Roe v. Wade. A lot of questions, I think, or not so much questions, but just a lot of First Amendment challenges, I think, are going to come up regarding the ability to advertise abortion-related services, or even to provide general information about where one could procure legal abortion if they're providing this information in states that no longer allow it. All of this is First Amendment protected activity, but I think we're going to see a lot of challenges to that activity and a lot of questions come up about what is protected by the First Amendment and what is not post Dobbs. So there's two, I think, for everybody to keep on their radar moving forward.
For sure. And do you think Americans know enough about the First Amendment in general?
No, no, unfortunately not. So there's an organization based out of DC called the Newseum. I think they're governed by what's called the First Amendment Foundation. I might have the organization's name a little bit wrong, but the point is that every, I think, 2 years they release a survey about Americans' knowledge of the First Amendment and just how much they know about the 5 freedoms the First Amendment gives us. And every year, the results are incredibly disappointing. The majority of Americans can't name all of the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment. Regularly, 98, 99% fail to name all of them. I think over a third can't name a single one. And that's really unfortunate for all of the reasons that I explained when we first started this interview, right, Max? Is that this First Amendment is supposed to be the blueprint to our democracy, right? We need to know what it's all about and those freedoms that we can all exercise and protect. So there's unfortunately a great need for education when it comes to just generally what the First Amendment is and what it does. Never mind getting into like the nuances of the law and what the First Amendment protects and why. We certainly need to cover all of that in more depth and really enhance all of our educational programming here at NEFAC, at your museum. It's the burden is really on all of us to make sure that all citizens understand the First Amendment, why it's so important and what it does. Because without that kind of education, we're not going to have people, we're not going to have people lining up to protect those freedoms when they become threatened. And, that's the greatest fear. So to answer your question, short and sweet, no, we're not educated enough as a country about what the First Amendment is. And all of us really need to take on the burden, shoulder that responsibility of learning more about the First Amendment and sharing that education with others.
And how do you utilize the First Amendment in your everyday life?
Oh, we're doing it right now. We're doing it right now, Max. We're having this conversation, right? We're talking about what's important to us. We're talking about, what's working in our country, what's not working in our country, and we're able to have these conversations without somebody coming in and cutting our Zoom conversation short, without our authorization, without somebody hauling us off to jail because they disagree with what we're saying. They don't like our opinions. We're able to speak freely about all of these really important subjects because of the First Amendment. So how do we exercise it? We're exercising it right now, and all of us, journalists, other citizens, we're in our communities having these kinds of conversations. That is the best way to exercise your First Amendment rights, is just to have productive, good faith conversations about what the important issues in this country are.
Awesome, Justin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Max, thanks for having me. It was great to talk to you.